So Susan Markowitz, go in there.
Good. Good morning and good afternoon, everyone. As we are all being let in, let's hang on a minute and then we'll get started. And there's Deborah. Good to see you. Thank you for taking the time. We're just going to take another minute or two so everybody can be let in. Got a nice group today, so hang on. Good afternoon, everyone. Just hang on another minute longer. Welcome to the Out of Israel Lunch and Learn. We're just waiting so we can add everybody who's in line. So hang on and we'll get started.
Hello, Lynn. John McFadden.
John, good to see you. Thanks for joining.
Been too long.
Have you with us. Let's see.
We don't need to be unmuted, do we?
Yeah, we're going to ask everybody, it's much as possible to stay on mute so that our sound is clear, except, of course, when you want to ask questions and comment.
Hey, Len.
Thanks for joining and good afternoon, everyone. It is just a little after 12:30, so why don't we get started? Thank you for joining the Out of Israel Lunch and Learn. We're going to ask everybody to stay on mute so that we can clearly hear our guest and, of course, Rabbi Andy for the hour that we have. I just wanted to remind everyone that if you'd like to be listed on our email invite list, just flip me your email or that of someone else. We're open to the entire community, and you can do that in the chat or just reply to the email that you get and give me the email of others. Today, we have a very interesting issue to discuss, and because of the time pressure on our guest, we're going to go to her first, and then she's going to talk and give us the overview for about 10 minutes or so, and then Rabbi Andy is going to teach us about some of the Jewish law and Jewish philosophy on education. But what we're going to do today is hear about a fascinating, interesting case that is ongoing right now in Harrisburg, and involves the formula that Pennsylvania uses to fund education throughout the state. I'm not going to get into the substance because we have someone who's been immersed in it, one of the leading experts on education law in the state and in the country. Deborah Gordon Clare is the executive director, CEO of the Education Law Center. She's been with the Education Law Center for some 16 years, has been the leader for about 7. She's also active in the Jewish community on the board of the Jewish Family and Children's Service, on the board over at Rodef Shalom. And she is brilliant. And I guess I should mention she went to Harvard Law School and Princeton undergrad. Most importantly, she's being kind enough to escape all of the folks going round the clock in Harrisburg working on the trial to be with us for 10 minutes. So, Deborah, welcome to the Adath Israel Lunch and Learn. And I want to give you the floor, again, assuming that many of us do not know about the case. So even though it's going to be hard being immersed in it, if you could take the time to give the overview and what's happening in it and stay as long as you want to take questions, you have the floor. Welcome.
Thank you so much for that very kind introduction. And I will do my best to give a brief overview of the case and then leave time to answer any questions. I'm the executive director of the Education Law Center, and along with the Public Interest Law Center and a private law firm, O'Melveny, we represent 6 school districts from across Pennsylvania, rural, urban, suburban, 2 statewide organizations that are the NAACP and the Pennsylvania Association of Rural and Small Schools, and families whose children attend underfunded and under-resourced schools. We filed a case against the state for failure to fund public education under the state constitution, filed 7 years ago. We are right in the middle of trial in Commonwealth Court in Harrisburg right now. By way of background, I will share that schools, it's not, many of you may be in Philadelphia or in the surrounding counties, and you know that we have gross underfunding issues here, but it is statewide. In fact, the vast majority of school districts in Pennsylvania are underfunded. They do not have the dollars that they need to be able to meet the needs of students. And one of our experts updated the state's own numbers to show that it's a $4.6 billion adequacy gap between what districts have and what they need just to provide a basic education to students. So that gap is about $4,800 per student between high and low wealth districts. I think it's worth noting that Black and Brown students are disproportionately impacted by these funding shortfalls because they're disproportionately educated in low wealth school districts and afforded fewer educational opportunities as a result. Here in Philadelphia, the largest school district in Pennsylvania, there's an over $1 billion gap between what the district has and what it needs just for our students to meet state standards. And that doesn't include the $4.5 billion in building costs needed to remediate old, crumbling, asbestos-laden physical plant, where the average age of our school buildings is 70 years. So again, just background fact, the state share of education in Pennsylvania ranks us 45th in the nation. Most states, the state provides a higher share of funding for schools, but it's flipped in Pennsylvania, where only 38% of what school districts have come from the state. The average nationally is 47%, so it makes us overly reliant on local wealth. And that creates unconscionable inequities. So it's a two-part problem in Pennsylvania. It's both how big is the pie, how much are we spending on education, and then how is it distributed based on actual needs of students and districts. So where are we in the trial? We've just completed our side, the petitioner's side, presenting our case to show that the state is not meeting its responsibilities under the Constitution. Over the course of 9 weeks, our legal team has called 29 witnesses. We've generated over 11,000 pages of testimony. Don't worry, it's all electronic. About the effects of underfunded schools since the beginning of trial. We heard from 10 different school superintendents in presenting our case. And the testimony, again, though rural, urban, suburban, from all across Pennsylvania has been consistent in talking about large class sizes, the absence of reading specialists or other academic supports. We heard about an elementary school that has 1,200 students, most of whom come to kindergarten without having had pre-K, not knowing how to hold a book, and they have 2 reading specialists for the whole school. That was in Greater Johnstown, Pennsylvania. Outdated textbooks. We heard from a history teacher who said that the book in her classroom has Bill Clinton as the last president. That's the textbook. Limited offerings, insufficient services for English learners, for students with disabilities, inadequate preschool offerings, not enough counselors or social workers, the school district that had to cut all K-8 art and library. And then we've heard from expert witnesses. We've heard from economists who have talked about the research that really shows that money matters, that when funding reforms are implemented, they have narrowed achievement gaps based on poverty and race and have improved long-term economic outcomes for students, greater educational attainment, increased adult earnings, etc. So, as I said, we've finished our case in chief, and now starting today, the legislative respondents have started presenting their witnesses, defending the current system of funding in Pennsylvania. And I will stick in the chat. You can learn more. We have a joint website between the Education Law Center and the Public Interest Law Center, fundourschoolspa.org, where you can read. I know Len sent around one of the recent Inquirer articles, but there's been a lot of media coverage, and we provide a daily summary of the testimony. So that's my quick overview. I'm happy to take a couple of minutes to answer any questions if that's appropriate.
Deborah, what's the objective as far as the remedy? Okay, so what is winning after all of the trial goes and is complete?
Right. We're asking the judge to declare the current system unconstitutional and order the legislature to fix it. It's the General Assembly that has the constitutional obligation to support and maintain a thorough and efficient system of public education. We're not asking for a specific dollar amount. We're not, and this is, Pennsylvania is late. Many other states have had this type of litigation, and we're not saying that she should order, 4.6 billion, though that is what our expert talked about, but rather we need recurring substantial increases in state education funding that's distributed equitably. And so it's not about just redistributing what we have, but rather growing the pie. And so ultimately, we're asking the judge to declare the current system unconstitutional, order the legislature to fix it. I should say it's quite likely that this case will be appealed to the Pennsylvania Supreme Court, but ultimately, this will go to the legislature, and they don't have to wait for our case. The governor will have his annual budget introduced next Tuesday, and then the legislature will pass their budget by June 30th. They could act now and really grow that pie and distribute it in a fair way. But given the history and given where we are in the reality, we're in court.
Let's open it up for questions. Rabbi Andy asked that we put them in the chat. So here's your chance to ask Deborah some questions before she goes back to court. Anybody have any questions? Deborah, before you go, I'll just ask one more. Well, here's one that came up in the chat. What happens if the legislature doesn't act? It's a good constitutional question. So a court comes up with an order. How do you answer that?
You go back to court, hold them in contempt. And really what we've seen in other states, Kentucky, New Jersey, New York, many states, and we had an expert talk about, he had done research on 28 states that have done these sustained reforms. The problem in Pennsylvania is we're like up and down, depending on who the governor is, depending on what the legislative makeup is. When you have a court order and you see the sustained over time recurring investments, districts can plan, you see huge benefits. And even in states that are maybe considered more conservative, when you have a court order in place, that does generally tend to put the pressure on the legislature to adequately and equitably fund education.
Couple of more questions. We'll read them quickly. We can get some quick answers. How will the strategy change on appeal? Do you anticipate a different outcome?
Have to see what Judge Cohn-Jubilier orders to know who's appealing and what that strategy would look like to the Pennsylvania Supreme Court. But our argument is that the state constitution puts the duty, says the General Assembly shall support and maintain a thorough and efficient system of public education to meet the needs of the Commonwealth. They're not doing that now. And let's see, who do you think will win? Obviously, we are going to win one way or another. But, a case like this has never gone this far in Pennsylvania. There have been challenges before that have gotten stuck around justiciability, the question of, is this a question for a court? We won that in the Pennsylvania Supreme Court a couple of years ago. It's why it's taken us so long to get to trial since the initial filing.
Deborah, question about describing the New Jersey experience.
Sorry, I'm trying, lots in the, what specific, I'm trying to see what exactly the New Jersey question is, but Abbott is the New Jersey case where there have been many different iterations. So about K-12, about pre-K, about the building infrastructure, but ultimately really has resulted in sustained increased funding for education and increased achievement. And, the benefit of, I guess, silver lining to having Pennsylvania so late is we can look at the research from other states to see money does matter and it does close poverty, it does address gaps that exist around race and poverty. When you have these sustained investments, you see it in increased high school graduation rates, college attainment rates, earnings, etc.
Well, now we have an avalanche of questions.
Yes, I'm trying.
And which is great. That's the beauty of this group. A lot of brilliance in so many corners.
Nurses, there's a question about nurses in school, food service, mental health, nutrition, all of that. The reality and what we heard from school districts over and over again, both at the Education Law Center just through our helpline, but also in the case on the stand, is that school districts are forced to make unimaginable choices about nurses or about providing mental health to students, and in many cases do not have the resources to provide that. There was a question about changing the distribution of the budget. It's both, Jerry. So it's both growing the pie, what are we allocating to K-12 public education, but then also distributing it. We have a fair funding formula in Pennsylvania from 2016 that takes into account number of students in poverty, number of English learners, tax capacity. Are you in a district that could tax themselves at a very high rate but won't be able to generate any dollars because your property values are so low? Taking all of that into account is the right way to go. It's just in Pennsylvania, we only allocate 14% of all funding through that formula. Again, you can't just redistribute what we have through the formula and think that we'll get to equity, because you'd be taking dollars away from a poor district to give to a super poor district. Like, that's not the goal. The goal is to grow what we allocate to education, and as we grow, distribute it in a fair way.
Ramel Scott, member of our community, is a former principal in the Philadelphia school system and another hero of mine for that incredible task, and she's retired from that. But I believe she has a question on here. Maybe we'll make this the last one so you can get back to work. I don't know if you could see it, Deborah, on the chat. Ramel Scott.
Charter schools, right? That's the question. So charter schools are public schools and are supposed to, under the law, educate students in the same way our public schools do in terms of whom they accept. Separate from this lawsuit, I will share that we've done a report on who the charter schools serve. And again, as a sector, and of course there are exceptions, et cetera, they are underserving students with disabilities, English learners, students in the foster care system, et cetera. So the school district is then, the dollars follow the child to that charter school. The school district of Philadelphia, for example, is then educating students with higher needs and fewer dollars. And so that is a different challenge, but also certainly a piece of this. And I believe that the other side in our funding case has some cyber charter schools as witnesses. So it'll be interesting to see what comes there.
Well, Deborah, we've kept you a long time, over time from what you intended. Your friend and our other rabbi, Rabbi Eric, always reminds us that as a community, we don't take positions on political issues, but I can take the very aggressive position that the Education Law Center, the organization that you run, is doing exceptional work in the education space for people and clients that can't afford representation. And you're really a hero in that space. Thank you for joining us today. Stick with us as long as you can, but if not, good luck back in court, and maybe we'll do this again, when this is over. But thank you, Deborah.
Thank you so much for having me.
Rabbi Andy, you have the floor.
That is a very tough act to follow. Thank you, Deborah, and thank you for the work that you're doing on behalf of the future of, America. So, hi, everybody. I am Rabbi Andy Markowitz. I'm one of the rabbis at Israel, and unlike Deborah, I am not an expert on education law in America. I am an expert on Jewish law. So what we're going to do is we're going to take a peek into what Judaism has to say about the topic of education and how it relates to the ideas of obligation and what we as community are obligated to do. Now, we have 40 minutes in order to cover this. We all know that Jews are known as sort of the people of the book. We're known to be highly educated people. Education has always been important to us. That's sort of like a cultural norm, but we're going to take a look into where that comes from and sort of the textual sources for that cultural norm. So I'm going to share my screen, whether you like it or not. There we go. Can everyone see? Look, everyone. A source sheet. Let me just get all of the different little screens that I need up in order to see if someone asks a question or something like that, or someone comes in. Len, can you be Roche letting people into the meeting? Okay, I appreciate that. Thank you for the deputization, being willing. I want to start with a quote from one of the most famous Jewish educators of all time, from Janusz Korczak. For those who don't know who he is, does anyone know who he is, who he was? Famous educator in the Warsaw Ghetto, educator of children. He famously went to his death alongside the children of the ghetto when they were liquidating it. Instead of just putting them on the cattle car by themselves, he went with them singing. It as a means to sort of calm them, and so that they didn't all freak out. Famous educator, famous Jewish educator, and academic on the topic of education. So I just want to begin with this quote. Would somebody like to read it? I don't want to only hear my voice today. Would someone be our Nachshon, our brave person? It's all English. You don't have to worry about, even though he wrote and spoke in Polish, we've translated it for you. It's easy. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Mr. Peck, unmute thyself.
I am unmuted.
Go for it.
What is he going to be when he grows up? Parents ask anxiously. They want their children to be better than them. Parents have a dream about a perfect man of the future. Our indolence keeps us from discovering beauty in the present. What else, if not a state of anticipatory hysteria, do statements like the following signify? If only he would start walking and talking at last. When I approach a child, I have two feelings: affection for what he is today and respect for what he can become.
When we're talking, thank you, Josh. When we're talking about education, we're talking about cultivating potential. We're talking about not who the child in front of you today is, and any of us who have had children or are in the field of education know sometimes that can be overwhelming and underwhelming at the same time. But we're talking about the importance of instilling values, instilling culture, instilling habits, instilling identity, and nurturing someone to become a functioning adult in society. And in this context in particular, we're going to be concerned with what it means to take a Jewish adult, right? Judaism, as universal as many of these things are, we're going to be able to extract universalist ideas from it. We are mainly concerned as Jews with how to raise more Jews. That's like the idea. That's the end goal. So education from the get-go is what is the end goal in mind. Education without an end goal is not education. It's doing something else. I don't know what it is. It's sort of play maybe, but education needs to have an end goal in mind. Okay. The first thing we are going to do is we are going to look at the textual sort of tradition and the thread that is woven through Judaism regarding education. So this is a line that people may or may not be familiar with. If you come to services with any regularity or pray with any regularity, you come in contact with this text multiple times over the course of a day. Would somebody like to read it in the English? You're right, Jerry, that is correct. Interesting that the Janusz Korczak quote is gender specific. He was writing in the 30s, which is a different time period. I don't know if he would be so gendered today, but that's the quote. But excellent observation. Okay, who would like to read? Bueller. Les, go for it. You got to unmute. Les, you're still muted. There you go. You got to unmute. There we go. Good to go. Nope. No, you just muted yourself again. This is the fun part of Zoom.
Okay.
There we go. You're unmuted. Go for it.
Okay. And teach them to your children, reciting them when you stay at home and when you are away, when you lie down and when you get up, and inscribe them on the doorposts of your house and on your gates, to the end that you and your children may endure in the land that the Lord swore to your fathers to assign to them, as long as there is a heaven over the earth.
Thank you, Les. I appreciate that. That was read beautifully. So what do you notice about this text? This needs to be, I'm asking, I want to hear what you notice about it. Who matters in the text? What's the point of the text? What are we talking about? Do you guys have questions when you read this text? Is something not clear? Right? So who is obligated to do what for whom and why? I guess is sort of my main question based on this text. It might seem very self-explanatory. Don't be shy, my Jewish friends, maybe even non-Jewish friends. Ellen, go for it.
You, the parent, should teach your children the words of the Shema.
So in the rabbinic tradition, they take the idea of learning these words very literally, and the rabbis actually understand it that when it says these words, it's not talking about all of Judaism. It's actually talking about these specific words right here on the page. That is a very good rabbinic read of the text, that parents are obligated, but if we sort of want to read it for what it actually means, right? If the parents are, sort of the plain meaning of the text, if the parents are obligated to teach their kids Judaism, and why? but really it's also how and why, right? So how are they obligated to teach their kids? What are you supposed to do in order to educate your children on the Jewish things, according to this? It says it right here. Oh my goodness.
Reciting them all the time, whenever you're away, when you're
Exactly. Talking about them constantly. When you go to sleep, when you get up, it's supposed to permeate every part of your being. It's supposed to be metaphorically inscribed on the doorposts of your house, but we actually physically inscribe them on the doorposts of our house when we put up a mezuzah, right? And what's the purpose of it? Why are we doing this? We're doing it so that the Jewish people might endure moving forward, because there has to be a goal with education. The goal with education in the Jewish mindset is to propagate Judaism and Jewish identity. It's to make people feel comfortable in a Jewish context. That's explicit here. But the only way we can do it is if they have exposure to it, right? Constant and repeated exposure to a Jewish context in order for them to learn. It's not very different with anything else in this world, right? The only way anyone learns anything is with constant attention and exposure to whatever it is that they're learning, right? Okay. Great that the obligation, according to Rashi, is even more specific. He gives us a time that we need to start educating our children from the moment that they begin to speak. That's the moment. You don't, from the get-go. And depending on how verbal your kid is, it might be very soon, Okay, we're going to look at a very interesting text. Actually, I love this text very, very much. Would someone like to read it for us? Again, this only works if people help, because it just gets awkward. Okay, I guess I'm talking to an empty screen, so I'm gonna read it myself. Elisha ben Abuya, Amar, says, one who learns as a child is compared to what? To ink written on new parchment, and one who learns as an elder is compared to what? To ink written on scraped parchment, right? That's a little ageist. I don't think that would fly today. Right, the idea here being, is that a hand? Is that a hand? Oh, okay, Jules Howard.
Susan will read.
Oh, Susan will read. Okay, go for it.
Where do you want me to begin?
Okay, in just a sec, okay? Thanks. So he said, Elisha ben Abuya, who is actually, this is one of the few times he's quoted by name in the entirety of the text, because he's an apostate and it was considered a heretic and excommunicated later in life. Interesting story. Anyway, he tells that he offers us this teaching that one who learns as a child is compared to a blank piece of paper, sort of the tabula rasa idea, that someone who is, that a child is sort of an empty slate on which to pour information into, whereas it's harder to learn as an adult. Well, I would say that might be true for some things. There are some things that are easier to learn as adults. It's not great. And Rabbi Yossi Bar Yehuda, Susie Markowitz, please.
Okay, am I on mute now? Okay. One who learns as a child is compared to what? To ink written on a parchment. And one who learns as an elder is compared to what? To ink written on a parchment. Rabbi Jose Bar Yehuda, man of Kafar Habavli, said, one who learns from young ones is compared to what? To one who eats unripe grapes and drinks wine from its press. And one who learns from elders is compared to what? To one who eats ripe grapes and drinks aged wine.
Okay, thank you. So what does that mean? Right? We're talking about where education comes from in this sense, in this place, right? For the first rabbi, Rabbi Elisha ben Abuya, was saying that you can't teach an old dog new tricks. You can only teach young people. It's really hard to teach old people. This next guy, Yossi Bar Yehuda, is saying that you can only learn from elders. You can't learn from young people, right? What's happening here? We're throwing all sorts of stereotypes, what we would call stereotypes today, out there and making overgeneralizations about stuff. Yes, Susan or Stan, your hand is up.
Okay, so if you're young, you don't have old ideas to get rid of. I mean, I think that's what he means about the scraped parchment. You might have to get rid of beliefs that you have, and that's hard to do.
It is.
Okay, but also, and also when you learn something young, somehow I think it stays with you more. But on the other hand, on the other hand, when you're older, you can put the learning into your experience and it sticks better. You have something to scaffold it on. So they're arguing, of course.
You're right. Of course they're arguing. That's what the rabbis do.
Right.
Jews arguing? What are you talking about, sir? Of course, yeah, that's what's happening here. And I would say that they're making gross overgeneralizations about it. And Rebbe, of course, Rebbe Yehuda Hanasi, ends with a very famous quote. Stephen, do you want to read it? You're muted.
I wanted to comment or ask a question about what was just read. It seems to this notion that one can only learn from those who are older, or that is preferable. One of the problems with that is the foundation upon which the notion of we have always done it this way is built. And this whole case that Deborah and her team are in is fighting against a statewide massive, we have always done it this way system.
I think that that's apt. And listen, lots of we're actually in a moment of transformation societally, where we're asking that question en masse about all sorts of things, right? We're asking, why are we always doing it this way? And all sorts of institutions are going through reformations and reorganizations, and it's sort of societal, right? Where the we've always done it this way is coming into conflict with, well, why can't we do it better? And that tension is currently there. It's sort of just in the zeitgeist of America today, the world today. So I hear that. I hear that tension. Stephen, do you want to read for Rebbe?
Sure. Where are you picking up from?
Honestly, Rebbe says.
Rebbe says, do not look at the jug, but rather at what is in it. For there are new jugs full of old, and old that do not have even new within them.
Okay, so Rebbe says, do not look at the jug. Al tistakel b'kankan, right? Ela masha yeshbo. Don't look at the container, the vessel, rather what's in it. There is what to learn from old and new, right? There's what to teach old and what to teach new. We should take each person at their own merits. And with that, I think John Harris put an interesting note in the chat that I want to respond to. Thinking about the early part of what we spoke about from the Deuteronomy text, do we have the leeway to think about the definition of your children, right? Because it's a person's obligation to educate their children as all Jewish children in the community, or all children in the community, whether it's Jewish or Jewish. And I think that's a really good guiding question for us to ask. And I think the rabbis are definitely concerned with that. We're not there yet. I'm sort of setting it up, but that is definitely a question in the rabbis' heads. Because what if the father or mother is not equipped properly to educate their child? Is everyone here a Talmid Chacham? Everyone here in the world a learned sage that knows everything about everything? No, we all have our own expertises. So outsourcing education is part of what it means to be part of a community, part of what it means to live in society, and how does that function? So the communal responsibility for education is definitely a conversation that opens up, but at base, it is incumbent upon each individual family unit to educate their children. And it's sort of the obligation ultimately of the parents of that child to ensure that they're getting a proper education and agitate for it if need be. Okay. So education can come from anywhere. Anyone can be educated. Let's go here. And here we have the first rabbinic curriculum. Okay. And a curriculum that ostensibly progresses. So does anyone want to take a stab at this Mishnah? This is the Mishnah. This is early rabbinic stuff. Les and Josh, I appreciate it. I want to hear more voices. Can I get Tom to do it? Tom, you're literate. You got to unmute, my dear friend. I apologize. It's technological. There we go. Your mic is not great. Okay, I'm sorry. Larry, why don't you do it? I apologize, Tom, for putting you on the spot and then I can't hear you.
Where are we?
He used to say.
He used to say, at 5 years of age, the study of scripture, at 10, the study of Mishnah, at 13, subject to the commandments, at 15, the study of Talmud, at 18, the bridal canopy, at 20, for pursuit of livelihood, at 30, the peak of strength, at 40, wisdom, at 50, able to give counsel, at 60, old age, at 70, fullness of years, at 80, the age of strength, at 90, a bent body, at 100, as good as dead and gone completely out of the world.
So, what do we
I'm
have?
not to 100 yet.
No one was making any claims, Larry. I think you doth protest too much. But what's going on here? What's happening in this text? What is this text? I started by saying it's a curriculum. It's not a curriculum. It starts as a curriculum and then it becomes something else.
It says what you're expecting of people as they age. And it's curious that the chuppah comes before earning of a livelihood.
So that's interesting so I'll tell you why that is in a sec, but that is an interesting piece, right? It starts off as a curriculum and it ends up with a projection of the ideal life lived, right? This is what a rabbinic scholar's life ought to look like, right? We're talking about creating a rabbinic community, a rabbinic society. So if this is the ideal, right? If you start the kid off at 5 years old, studying Torah and studying the Tanakh, studying the Bible, and then progress to the Mishnah by the time that they're 10, and then 13, and then 15, by the time they get to full adulthood, they can live the life we want for them. But we have to equip them properly with the things and the skills and the knowledge to have access to communal life. Stephen.
Yeah, so actually this progression here, I think it was in yesterday's Daf Yomi, there was a discussion that when people are going to be married, that their parents negotiate the terms of dowry that we provide to the children. So it was actually tradition, the parents would give the new couple essentially the startup capital that they could live on. So it was actually at that time practical and even maybe desirable to be married before one had established a livelihood, and they had the dowry money to fall back on until they were on their own feet.
So I think that's part of it, but I think that's a symptom of the cause, not the root of the cause. The reason it is the way it is because
Context at the time.
Yeah, it's a little bit of the context, right? They also were very interested in not having unmarried men at the time serve as teachers for young children. Take what you will. So if the ideal profession is to teach, then you shouldn't teach until you're married. So you need to be married before you can then teach. That's sort of the cyclical, sort of circular nature of the logic here. But we have here a path trajectory, right? And if we were going to make an analog for this today, right? We would say the kid has to be able to read by kindergarten, right? The kid has to be able to write an essay by what time? You know, the kid has to be able to do algebra by, middle school. The kid has to be able to do calculus and know biology and know this. We have something very similar, and then they have to go to college and then maybe even grad school. And there's a life path trajectory that we expect in society for success. And this is the ancient Jewish analog of that. Okay? They're outlining it for us. They say in order to succeed in life, humans need education. And this is what we think it is. Any questions, comments, concerns, or feelings about anything so far? The arc of life. Thank you, Ramel. I didn't see that. I don't always see the chats. Thank you, Ramel. Okay. Okay. Weiter, shall we continue on? Now we have an interesting question, right? This is like the Jewish question. I'm going to just call on people that are here, so I apologize. Stan, do you want to read? I'll give you 2 seconds if you want.
Okay.
In connection to the Mishnah statement about the importance of Torah study, the Gemara relates the following incident. And there already was an incident which Rabbi Taflon and elders were reclining in the loft of a house of Nitzan Lod when this question was asked of them. Is study greater or is action greater?
Okay, Stan Weintraub, I'm gonna stop you there. That was excellently read.
These are the guys from the Haggadah.
This is like what's in the Haggadah, very, very much like what's in the Haggadah, right? They're sitting there, hanging out, having lunch. Reclining means that they were having lunch, right? Just like we recline on Pesach, it's free people, rich people back in the day. Imagine scenes from all sorts of great movies, like Cecil B. DeMille movies, of scenes of ancient Greek people laying down on couches and eating grapes. I'm thinking of history of the world, but that's because I'm less cultured. And I feel like so they're sitting there, they're having a light lunch, and the question of one of their students asks these great rabbis, what's more important, studying or doing good things? What's more important? And what happens? Stan Edelstein, give me the answer.
I lost my Zoom feed for a second. I'm reestablishing. So
okay, never mind.
I'll come back.
Rabbi Tarfon answered and said, action is greater. Rabbi Akiva answered and said, study is greater. Everyone answered and said, study is greater, but not as an independent value. Rather, it is greater as study leads to action.
Okay, so what's more important here?
These are.
They're equally important.
They're equally important, but in order to do the thing that you need to do, you have to know that the thing you need to do is the right thing that you need to do. And how do you learn that the thing you need to do is the thing you need to do is because you learn it. The only way we know how to behave like human beings in society is by being in society, right? School is not just learning ideas, it's also acculturation and socialization. Right? There's a social dynamic to it, right? They're sitting there having lunch and having a conversation, right? The whole context of this is an explanation of what of itself, right? It's sort of like it's a circle within a circle. They are acting and being in community and talking about how they can make their community better by acting and being community. And the only way they could do that was because they're all sages and they're all learning Torah study together. So engaging in the act of learning as a social enterprise creates positive society, and creating spaces for people to have learning creates a positive society and opportunities for people to go out and make the world a better place. Questions, comments, concerns, or feelings about this one?
So those who are not able to study are more prone to action, are they somehow lesser than those who have the ability to study and learn?
So in the rabbinic context, yes. I mean, that's an unfortunate reality. Rabbinic Judaism at base is snobby and elitist. It's gross. And especially the ancient rabbis, they were super snobs. If you didn't do Judaism the exact way they said, because remember, Rabbinic Judaism is essentially all that there is now. But back in the day, right, in the time of the Mishnah, right, which is Rebbe Tarfon's time, in the time of the Mishnah, right, there were other Judaisms that existed simultaneously, and the rabbis were fighting for dominance. So yeah, they would have said, they actually called people who couldn't study Amei Aretz, which literally means, which is not a nice thing to call someone who is not able to study. They did not understand, they did not have a concept of different learning styles. They didn't have a concept of differentiated education. They believed that sitting there and listening to lectures was the way to do it because they were influenced by the Greeks, and that's how the Greeks did it. And they were creating a society of intellectuals. There's a reason that my title as Jewish spiritual leader just means teacher. It means sage, literally, like great one. Rabbi means great one. Please call me that in public. I love it. But it's because they were trying to create a society that upheld the ideas and a society built around ideas. And as elitist as it is, and as troubling as it is, and as frankly crappy as that is, you know, to the people who don't fit in, that created a society that was not dependent, and a religion and an ethnicity that was not dependent upon geography. It was dependent upon ideas and the exchange of ideas, which can span the globe. The reason that Judaism, Rabbinic Judaism, won and succeeded in the diaspora was because it was a Judaism that you could hold on to, because an idea doesn't need to happen in Jerusalem. You can have a beautiful conversation in Spain, in France, in America today, right? It's not dependent upon geography like ancient Israelite religion was. Okay. We ready for the next 10 minutes? Okay. Let's get into, okay, this is, I'm not gonna get into that one. Okay. Oy. Let's look at some of the takeaway. We're gonna do a deep dive into the Rambam. The Rambam, Maimonides, people have probably heard of Maimonides before. He's kind of a famous guy. He wrote the Mishnah Torah, which is the first definitive codification of Jewish law outside of the Talmud. And in it, he has an entire section called Hilchot Talmud Torah, the laws of study, the laws of Torah study. And so here we go. Let's do it. Let's learn what the Rambam has distilled for us. He makes it very simple, very easy, very direct as to sort of what the practice was starting in like the 1400s. So does somebody want to read? Rachel, do you want to read?
Slaves and the young. Actually, microphone has been having problems. Can you hear me? Slaves and the young under the age of puberty are exempt from the obligation of studying Torah. Father to teach his young son Torah.
So we're going to stop right? Stop right there. You're reading beautifully. Thank you. Those three categories are the three categories that are frequently excluded from positive time-bound mitzvot, okay, in traditional Jewish law. I don't want to like gloss over it. That's just part of what the tradition, the received tradition is. We've moved past that a little bit, a lot of bit, hopefully as conservative Jews, but it is not, but I don't want to say that that's not still in play in some way. Okay, so there are parts of the Jewish world where, well, we don't really have slaves anymore, but people under a certain age and women are exempt from this, and they don't teach women everything. And that's its own stuff within the Jewish world, which we're not going to touch on, but let's continue. It's the Sarah, Rachel, thank you.
father to teach his young son Torah, although young son over puberty, as it is said, and ye children talking of them. A woman is under her son, since only one whose duty has a duty to teach.
Right? Again, troubling. Troubling, but he's saying essentially that essentially what we established before, that every parent's obligation is to, if we're going to extrapolate the most generic and most amenable version of this principle to our modern sensibilities, it is that every parent has the obligation to ensure the proper education of their child. Okay? And my parents are here, and I can say they did a good job. Okay, shkayach. Thank you. But, right, what do you do if someone can't teach, if you can't teach your own children, right? Because again, not everybody has the capacity to do that. So then you have to outsource it to somebody else. Okay, but how does the community pay for the outsourcing of that? Is it part of tutoring? Is it incumbent upon the parent to do that? What if the parent can't afford it? Does the community have something to do with it? So the rabbis address that issue. Okay. And we end up with this. Len, do you want to read it?
Teachers of young children are to be appointed in each province, district, and town. If a city has made no provision for the education of the young, its inhabitants are placed under a ban till such teachers have been engaged. And if they persistently neglect this duty, the city is excommunicated, for the world is only maintained by the breath of school children.
Literally, it says the breath of, or by the mouths of babes. That's what the Hebrew says. So what is this text saying here, essentially?
That if you don't teach your young, you're not part of the community.
It goes even so further than that, right? It's not just the individual family that doesn't teach their young. It's if the community does not provide sufficient opportunities for the children to learn in that community, then that community needs to be excommunicated from the greater part of Israel, because they are failing the future of the Jewish people. Right? Excommunication, we're talking like sitting Shiva for the community, not talking to them. Yeah, Rachel.
Other than gender,
Your mic's cutting in and out. I'm sorry. Type it. Can you type it? Tom, would you type? But always remember that learning includes learning from your and others' mistakes, direction in one's first action. Now, that's true. That's true. That's the social element of learning. That's essential to it. Totally.
They're not talking about the social element of learning here. They're talking about formalized classroom education.
Mm-hmm. They are. They're talking about making sure that there are enough teachers for the students, literally, that they're saying that there's adequate teachers. And if a city does not have adequate teachers, then they are failing and can't be considered part of the greater collective, right? And that in order that actually you use social pressure against the other community, right? All the other communities around that community band together and say, we're not going to do trade with you unless you educate your young properly.
This is a clause that could be footnoted in Deborah's brief at the court. Fund education, pay teachers.
Right, or be excommunicated.
Yeah, right. That under threat of excommunication, right? Right. But really, it is a financial piece. There's a financial piece to it, right? If you're cut off from the rest of the communities around you, you wither and die. It just doesn't work. You're interdependent, especially in a small, tight-knit agrarian society. Susie Markowitz.
What occurs to me is that the young lady who was speaking initially was talking about the same things that the school district is currently doing that our wise sages, Maimonides, etc., said before. that, you have to learn. They're not, as you pointed out, they're not making provisions for people with special learning needs. And so she's fighting that. We're still fighting that today. I thought that was very interesting because I thought maybe we would come to some sort of a realization by our sages and rabbis that not everyone fits into the same mold.
So they definitely had, I could have brought, they talk about how to teach constantly because they are an academic sort of culture and cultivating academic society. That they do talk about the different types of learners, and there are lots of Mishnayot and Pirkei Avot about this learner learns this way and this learner learns that way. So they recognize that there are different learning styles. I'm not sure if they understood different intelligences the same way we do, or anything like that. But they do say, and as Rachel, you said, the text in this English, it's only some boys in the town. It said everyone in the town needs to be educated, and that's the ideal, right? We legislate for the ideal. The ideal is that everyone is getting a fair and equal education as part of this. Even teachers definitely make mistakes. Should the lawyers at Dilworth who seem to be advocating for poor education therefore be excommunicated? Well, we don't live in a rabbinic society, so I am luckily in a position to not have to answer that question. I don't make the rules. So if I made the rules, I don't know, maybe we do this, but I'm just offering what rabbinic tradition has to say on this issue. Education is prime, is essential. Okay.
Well, you're talking about how education, we're talking about outcomes, and she was talking about the outcomes that we're seeing right now, that the lack of education is leading to poor outcomes and how those outcomes are impacting our society as a whole, which lines up directly with this text.
You said it,
Larry.
You said it, Larry.
Oh,
Larry.
yeah.
I
Not
said,
who. I said you. I thought you said who.
I said you said it. You definitely said it. Larry, do you want to read this next one?
25 children learn with one teacher. If there are between 25 and 40, they place another person with the teacher to assist him in educating them. If there are more than 40, they appoint for them 2 teachers.
Okay, so I think that's a pretty interesting analog to today's conversation about education and teacher-student ratios. I saw that and I was like, wow, they understood that a teacher could be overwhelmed by too many learners, and a learner could not get the attention that they need if there are the ratios off. 25 to 1 is still tough, I would have to say, right? That's I think that's pretty standard in our public schools today, but that's still pretty tough. I was blessed, thank you to my parents, always being in classes with like 15, most 20 kids growing up.
Aren't Philadelphia in the 30s?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. And this is sage wisdom from, 1,000 years ago, 1,500 years ago. It's because this is stuff that he's taken from the Gemara. Okay. This has to do with how to teach, but I'm also conscious of time. How long do we go? To 1 to 2 or 1:30? 1:30?
I think 1:30, but take another 5 minutes.
Okay. And here's a take on it. We'll end with this one. Right? I keep going. There's just so much text. Does someone else want to read? Not one.
I'll read.
Thank you, sir.
A disciple should not feel ashamed before his fellow students who grasp the lesson after hearing it once or twice, while he needs to hear it several times before he knows it. For if this makes him ashamed, he will go through college without having learned anything.
So, I said, what is this advocating for? It's advocating for creating an environment where people should be free to ask questions, and it's okay to not know, and for it to be it's okay to sort of struggle a little bit.
How in the world did they get the word college in there?
Beit HaMidrash. It's Beit Midrash. It's study hall. Right. So keep reading, Sue.
I can't keep reading if you move. The ancient sages accordingly said, a bashful man cannot learn, nor a passionate man teach. Ethics of the Father 2:6. These observations only apply when the student's lack of understanding is due to the difficulty of the subject or to their mental deficiency. But if the teacher clearly sees they are negligent and indolent in their study of Torah, and that this is the cause of their failure to understand, it is his duty to scold them and shame them with words of reproach, and so stimulate them to be keen. And in this regard, the sages said, arouse awe in the pupils.
So essentially saying teach to the student, right? You should know your students and be in relationship with them, and know which student needs a kick in the tush and which student needs a little bit more time with the material, right? We need educators that can educate, right?
Right, but shame them is rather strong.
Right. Scold and shame doesn't really align with today's sensibilities.
I mean, we're talking about 1,000, 1,500 years ago.
Yeah, okay.
Right. I mean, my father was hit when he was in school, wasn't he? No? I'm looking at him.
What did you say?
What? Repeat that, Andrew.
Dad, weren't you like hit to like change your hand?
Oh yeah, yeah. I was supposed to be left-handed, and I'm not.
That your parents are school.
But it was both parents and instructions to the teacher.
Yeah. So like, I mean, we're not so far off from corporal punishment. You know, we're not.
No, we're not.
I mean, God willing, that never happens to my kids, right? Or or my kids' kids. But this isn't so far away that it's so strange. But he is advocating for knowing your students and knowing their capacities, right? And teaching to the student.
I think that the parsha here or whatever is alluding to some students are lazy and need to be coaxed, and that may be you have to be perceptive enough to be able to tell which ones need to be pushed and other ones that don't.
Interesting. Tracy, spanking was still in the books when you started teaching. Wow. I was in school in '92, so thank goodness that didn't happen to me. But I definitely needed a kick in my tush quite a bit as a kid. I was
Akibograms.
Let's not talk about that. I'm teaching. Tov. Listen, there's so much more. There's so much more. Let's end with a Heschel quote. Let's end with a Heschel quote and then call it a day. I'll read it. Everything depends on the person who stands in front of the classroom. The teacher is not an automatic fountain from which intellectual beverages may be obtained. The teacher is either a witness or a stranger. To guide a pupil into the promised land, the teacher must have been there themselves. When asking themselves, do I stand for what I teach? Do I believe what I say? The teacher must be able to answer in the affirmative. What we need more than anything else is not textbooks, but text people. It is the personality of the teacher, which is the text that the pupils read, the text that they will never forget. Friends, Heschel here at the end is saying that Jews in particular need people who in the field of education that other people can buy into, because ultimately in order to learn, and learning is a social enterprise and is a dynamic enterprise in which the learner and the teacher, right, the ostensibly crumpled up, scraped off parchment and the new parchment are both being written on at the same time. Judaism holds that that's a sacred relationship. It is a relationship that needs to be elevated, needs to be nurtured, and needs to be given proper support in order to create a society that is successful, a society that creates future human beings that can go and succeed. I think while it is very, very easy to, while it is explicit, these texts are explicitly in a Jewish context, it is very easy to extrapolate general principles about education and the value of education and the importance of the access to education within Jewish society and the world that Judaism wants to help make real. So my prayer for all of us, and I'm sorry that we're going over a little bit, but I'm a rabbi, I like to teach. My prayer for the world is that we live in a world where all students have access to education. Everyone has access to that roadmap that we saw earlier that the rabbis laid out for us, or a modern version of it, in which they can go and be successful in the world and ultimately help society be successful and help the world be a better place.
Todah, Rabbi, thank you, and thanks to Deborah who had to leave us. A great hour and 10 minutes of learning. Everyone go have a good day, and if you need to be added to the email list, let me know. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Bye.